أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us another opportunity to converge here for another session of knowledge. We beseech Him to make it beneficial for every one of us and grant our desires. So inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we have to cover today is al-basmala bayna suratayn wa maratib al-qira'ah. Al-basmala bayna suratayn, that is how to say your basmala, bismillah ar-rahman ar-rahim, in between two surah and the levels of recitation. But before we go on, in our last class we talk about awjuh al-isti'adha ma'a al-basmala, that is the ways of seeking refuge with basmala and with the surah you want to recite. And we said there are four ways of saying al-isti'adha with basmala and with the surah you want to recite. And these four ways, all of them are permissible. The four ways are permissible. Just for a recap, I'm going to list the ways again. We said the first one is qat'ul jami', and this is the most popular one that most people used to follow. Qat'ul jami', that is separating the three expressions from one another. You separate your isti'adha, you recite it separately, you recite your basmala separately, and you recite the first verse you want to recite. You also read that one separately. For instance, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Ar-Rahman. So in this instance, you all you need is to read them separately, in the sense that you are going to have you'll be able to breathe at the end of each recitation. And waslul jami', this is a kind of way of reciting isti'adha or basmala, that you join the three expressions together. You join your isti'adha with basmala and with the surah you want to recite. For instance, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن. So I did not give myself a breathing space when I'm joining the three expressions together. And the third one is waslul basmala bis surah. This implies that you must have read your isti'adha separately. You must have read your isti'adha separately. Then you now have to join your basmala with the surah you want to recite. Okay? For instance, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن. This is what we call waslul basmala bis surah. Okay? And the third one is waslul isti'adha bil basmala. Here you would have you are going to join your isti'adha with basmala, and then you will read the verse separately. Waslul isti'adha bil basmala, joining of the of isti'adha with basmala, then you read the surah separately. So today inshallah we will be looking at awjuh al-isti'adha bayna suratayn, that is the way of saying your basmala in between two surah. That is, perhaps you are reading a particular surah, maybe the last verse of the surah you are reading, you want to begin another surah. So how are you going to say your basmala in between these two surahs? So there are ways of saying that. And just as we have it under isti'adha ma'al basmala, we have four ways. We also have four ways of saying al basmala in between two surah. We have four ways, of which just only one is not permissible. The other three ways are permissible. The other three ways are what? Are permissible. But because it is halves, the word hafsin and asim that we are using, because there are other ways of other styles of reciting Al-Quran. We have other riwayat. So riwayat to Hafsin and Asim usually begin his own recitation with the saying of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim at the beginning of every other surah. There are other riwayat. That they don't say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim whenever they want to begin another or a new surah. They need not say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and it is correct. But Hafs will always say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim at the beginning of every surah, except when he wants to begin Surah Tawbah, concluding Surah Al-Anfal, and you want to begin Surah Tawbah, he will not say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, because it is already it is not recommended. Okay, it is not recommended to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim at the beginning of Surah Tawbah. So you just join them together. Although there are other ways of joining Al-Anfal with Surah Tawbah. For instance, or at times, one may exercise what we call Saktatun al-Latifa. Saktatun al-Latifa, which means all you need to do is just to remain quiet for a very short period of time without breathing out. You are not going to breathe out, but you are going to remain silent for that period of time. Very, very short. And we call it Saktatun al-Latifa. For instance, at the end of Surah Al-Anfal, we have وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِن بَعْدُ وَهَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا مَعَكُمْ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مِنكُمْ وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ بَرَاءَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That is how Hafs is going to read it. It's just going to join it together. So one may also, without saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, as you can see, but one may now exercise Saktatun Latifa, that I'm just going to pause before I begin the first verse of Surah Tawbah. Whereas that pause, I'm not going to breathe out. I'm going to hold my breath in. For instance, Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Bara'atun min Allahi wa rasulih. The way I read it, I did not breathe out. I only did as if I paused. If one is observing me physically, you'll be able to know that I didn't breathe out. I only pause without breathing out. At the end of each verses, if one is reading verse by verse, one is supposed to breathe at the end of each verse so that you have more energy to push the next verse. But in this instance, it is Saktatun Latifa. You are just going to remain silent without breathing out. And that is another style of joining Al-Anfal and At-Tawbah together, just to indicate that, okay, you are concluding a surah, Surah Al-Anfal, and you want to begin Surah Al-Tawbah. which is not having Bismillah Rahman Rahim at its own beginning. Like I said, there are four ways of which um, the first three are permissible, while the last three way is not permissible. What are the ways? Like we have it in the way of saying al isti'adha ma'al basmala, and with the surah we want to recite. We also have waslul jamia when we want to begin I mean sorry, waslul jamia when we want to say Bismillah Rahman Rahim in between two surah. Waslul jamia, we can join all of them together. What do we mean by waslul jamia? It means the last verse of the surah we are concluding, and then the saying of Bismillah Rahman Rahim, and then the first verse of the surah we want to begin. So we can join these three together and it will be regarded as Waslul Jamia, and thereafter it is permissible. This way is permissible. Many people don't usually do this, perhaps because of the challenges they may be having in joining long verses together. Okay, so it is permissible to join everything together. For instance, okay, which surah should I use? I can use surah to al-ikhlas. For instance, ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق. So I said my Bismillah Rahman Rahim in between two surah. Between which surah? Surah Al-Ikhlas and Surah Al-Falaq. That is Wasl Jamia. Again, we also have Qat'ul Jamia, that is separating these wordings from one another, just as we have it under Awjuhul Isti'adha Ma'al Basmala, and with the surah we want, with the new surah we want to recite. We also have Qat'ul Jamia here, that is separating every one of them from one another. I can also say وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس. This style is very common among reciters, because it is also one of the styles that the Prophet ﷺ used to exercise. كان الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم يقرأ آية بعد آية. The Prophet ﷺ usually read a verse. He usually read verses after one another. When he read a verse, he stop before he begin another verse. So this is if one is also exercising this, the person is doing sunnah. It doesn't mean that the other three ways are not permissible. Qat'u al-Jamia, that is what we have just done. And the third one is Waslul Basmala bi awwal surah. This implies that joining our basmala with the surah we want to recite, it means we must have read the previous verse. We must have read it separately. That is the last verse of the surah we are concluding. We must have read that one separately. Then we say we now join our basmala with the surah we want to begin. For instance, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق. So this is also permissible. That is Waslul Basmala li awwal surah. And the last way of which is not permissible is joining the last verse with basmala. Someone asked that what is the last verse? And I believe okay, someone asked what is the Arabic expression for this. I said um, قطع الأول قطع الأول ووصل الثاني بالثالث. قطع الأول ووصل الثاني بالثالث. So it is going to make the listener imagine as if the basmala is the last verse the reciter just finished. So that is why the scholars concluded that this way is not permissible. It is not permissible. The first three ways are permissible, and the last way is not permissible. So everyone should try to practice these permissible styles or the permissible ways so that they can also have a taste of it, and they'll be able to you'll be able to adopt the convenient way.